founding and running nonprofits are labors of love, but funding almost feels like a perpetual hamster on a mill. But one way or another, this hamster, in the form of our next guest, Asjah Monroe, has been phenomenally successful running Small House. And welcome to the Language of Business.
Hi, thank you. I've never been referred to as a hamster.
I think it is meant as a note of affection. It's really impressive what you started. How did you found Small House?
Yeah, so about a year ago, I discovered there was just so much need among young adults, age 18 to 24, which is transition age. They just need a little bit of help and support in the process. And so a lot of folks don't realize that every time 3 young adults get housed, there's still 19 more that go without a placement and continue to wait. So we need more options, but we also need youth-specific supportive options.
Yours is a residential solution as opposed to a day solution, correct?
Yes, it's not just simply a drop-in center. It would be more of a communal living. So everybody kind of living together in the same space.
And what is the average length of stay for your residents?
They would have the option to stay up to 2 years. And we find that's usually a pretty good time, but folks can kind of move on whenever they feel ready.
Trust is at the core of any young venture, especially a startup. Asjah, how do you establish the trust of your residents, some of whom might stay with you for up to 2 years?
Yeah, so trust, it's actually what's at the core of how we work with the young adults and what we do with them in order to be able to leverage the relationship, which is a core part of our mission, leveraging warm relationships with the adults. Young adults, part of how we do that is giving time and space, give them an opportunity to kind of like figure out where they've been and what they've been through. And, you're there if they need you, but you're also able to step back a little bit if they don't need you as much as an ear to listen. So part of it has to do with listening and just showing up and doing what you say you're going to do, the consistency piece. Those are I think, the main ingredients to developing trust with the young adults.
Thank you again for your Herculean efforts. This is wonderful. What keeps you up at night most about the future of Small House?
Yes, love that question. Actually, what keeps me up, I would almost say, has been the thing that has always kept me up at night, which is really the well-being and the safety of the youth, because homeless is not a thing to be in anyone's life at any time, but particularly more so when you're just getting started in life, you're young, you're 18, 19, 20, 21. That's kind of what keeps me up at night, is making sure they have a place to be that they can go.
It's difficult to quantify the effect of homelessness at any level, but why haven't either state or local or even federal resources done more to protect the youth who are your constituents?
That is, I think, the $1,000,000 question. I do want to say, I think people often don't realize that youth and young adults experiencing homelessness looks a little bit different from the norm of homelessness, which typically is chronic homelessness. You see folks who are out and about, and that's usually the picture that you get. But often with young adults, they're more so housing unstable, and they're more so not as visible. So they're having episodes of homelessness, but they're doubled up. They're living a couple of people in one place. So they're wildly undercounted as a population. And I think we're at the beginning of being able to understand how this subpopulation experiences homelessness. The city, as of 2019, has a plan of action. It's actually on their website. And so they have a lot of things that they're doing.
The focus of this segment is on not-for-profit versus for-profit management, and we opened it by saying that funding is always a challenge, hence the analogy of a hamster on a wheel. How do you receive your funding?
We primarily rely on individual donors and grants currently, but we're looking toward potentially funding from governmental sources, federal, state funding.
What would you say is Small House's competitive advantage, if you will? Granted, this isn't corporate America. You're doing a tremendous service to the community and, of course, the residents. But what would you say your competitive advantage is?
We focus on a little slice, a little niche of the young adults who are experiencing homelessness. So, there are a lot of programs that do emergency, like you become homeless and that night you have somewhere to go. There are folks that focus on like rapid rehousing, which is let's get you into an apartment as quickly as possible, and then we'll serve you from there. What we focus on is folks who wouldn't otherwise be immediately eligible because maybe they're not literally homeless. We want to be kind of low barrier and I guess user friendly, if you will, for folks who are more at imminent risk of becoming homeless, right? So like people who are probably sleeping on other people's couches and, for whatever reason are going to soon be homeless or just became homeless and maybe they're not as high need. We kind of focus on supporting those folks because that's an underserved population.
How do you do, and I perish the thought of using this term, but market your services? Is it word of mouth referrals? Are you going to Mass and Cass in Boston and handing out business cards? Help us to understand that aspect of it.
I would say it's word of mouth referrals in the sense that we're working directly with other organizations, other youth serving organizations, but because there's just so much need out there, oftentimes what you'll find is that the same few organizations, because there's only a handful of youth specific ones, are getting the calls and they have a complete overwhelm. So many folks that, don't get services with them because there's just not enough space, perhaps, or whatever the case may be.
Asjah, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Asjah Monroe, the founder of Small House.
Are you a problem solver? Do you see the big picture and the small details? Want to turn big data into big decisions? Take AI to the boardroom. Translate rocket science into the science of business. Build your career at digital speed with a Master of Science in Business Analytics. Be ready for careers like analytics consultant, data science, analytics strategist, data translator, BI analyst, technical business analyst. 10 months and you're in business analytics.
They say that executive skills and abilities are transferable, but when they said that, did they mean between for-profit and not-for-profit management? Our next guest certainly knows about both. Welcome, Charley Cummings, to the Language of Business.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg.
So let's start with the obvious question. Which came first, the not-for-profit chicken or the for-profit egg in terms of your career?
Well, in my case, I feel like I was always looking for both the ends and the means. And in the for-profit world, I felt like I was getting the means and had the everyday challenges of working with amazingly talented teams and challenging business problems in the consulting world. But I wasn't getting the ends. At the end of the week, I just didn't care all that much if this cable company got a few more points of market share. And in the nonprofit world, I had sort of the opposite experience where I had the ends without the means, where we never had the right resources. We never quite had the right mix of people, and sort of the day-to-day was a struggle. But at the end of the day, I was really fired up about what we were trying to achieve, which in this case was we had formed an advocacy group in favor of the country's first offshore wind farm.
Am I oversimplifying to say that for-profit businesses are all about the bottom line and not-for-profit is about sustainability?
No, especially when it comes to these new types of social enterprises. You have everything from ESOPs, which are employee-owned firms, to public benefit corporations, cooperatives, even more recently, companies that are owned by perpetual trusts, sort of sit at that intersection and are sort of declaratively saying we're about more than just obtaining a profit here. We're specifically prioritizing a set of other stakeholder metrics that are important to us. And I think those emerging business models and structures are really, really exciting and positive developments that sort of blend elements of both sectors.
When you are in recruitment mode, how do you sell somebody on the merits of a nonprofit as opposed to something sexier like, I don't know, working for Netflix?
I think ultimately it comes down to, as we age, our perspective on what's important seems to change and evolve. And if you ask the graduates of 40 or 50 years ago, they have a much different perspective on what's important in life than the folks that maybe graduated 5 or 10 years ago. And I would say for folks early on in their career, if you hitch your wagon to someone you respect that is having an impact in the world that you think is meaningful and fulfilling, it doesn't matter what company that is, what sector it's in, it doesn't matter how much money you're making doing it, that'll put you on a path to something interesting in a broader sense of the world and working with people that you think you have something to learn from. And the context is ultimately really unimportant.
Normalizing impact is sort of the holy grail these days for any entity. How would you go about evaluating or almost developing a social impact scorecard for the various ventures that you've been involved with?
Yeah, so here at Walden Mutual Bank, we have spent a lot of time thinking about that. And generally, we place it into three different buckets. So the first bucket is, what are the minimum criteria when we qualify a borrower as to whether they fit our model or not? The second bucket is, how do we assess progress over time at individual borrowers and in aggregate across the entire lending portfolio? And the third bucket is, how do we share best practices from folks that are sort of further along the spectrum than others? I think when it comes to assessing impact in the second bucket over time, we've leveraged other organizations like B Corp, SASB, which is the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, and others to try and do a holistic assessment of how these different organizations and companies are affecting all of their stakeholders. And so that's what that assessment is designed to measure, both, at the beginning of a loan origination and then, over the course of a relationship with a borrower.
If you were to reflect, Charley, on the last couple of years during the pandemic, on an A to F scale in terms of corporate effectiveness, what grade would you give the average for-profit company and then the average not-for-profit company?
I can't speak to big companies. Sort of setting those aside, I will say for smaller operators, I can't give them anything less than an A. I think the challenges of keeping a team in place and motivated, recruiting additional team members, changing your business model overnight, taking on new demand, shutting down significant portions of or your entire company, all in a matter of weeks. I just have a tremendous sense of respect for the folks that have been able to navigate that and are still standing, regardless of their profits or sort of how healthy their balance sheet is. I think in the nonprofit world, I would just reiterate the same thing. I would maybe give them an A+, because in the nonprofit world, you see so much volatility depending on the underlying business model of the nonprofit. If you're a nonprofit that depends on donations, the last couple of years have been far more volatile than years past. Here in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Food Bank, the Greater Boston Food Bank, those organizations stepped up in a huge way and made a material difference in what was a much larger problem all of a sudden overnight. And so those operators, I think, deserve a huge thank you from their surrounding communities.
And we owe you a huge thank you for your time today. Charley Cummings, talking about for-profit and not-for-profit business. Thank you for joining us on The Language of Business.
People across New England and New York are working hard to make food more sustainable, and we can all play a role in supporting them. Banks can be powerful advocates for change, so we're launching the first new mutual bank in a generation focused on local food and farming. Join us and support sustainable local food just by opening an account. Plant your pennies and join our waitlist at waldenmutualbank.com.
State funding is always a challenge no matter what industry you're in, but how about when it relates to children and family services? We're on location with Denis Pilotte, who is an area manager, and welcome to The Language of Business.
Thank you for having me.
What do you do as an area program manager for the Department of Children and Family Services?
At this point, I oversee 5 different teams of social workers. 3 of my teams are Child Protective Services. The other 2 teams work with adolescents. I also do coordinate a lot of the other initiatives in the office, a lot of the programming, internships, oversee most of the adolescent placements.
What is unique about Massachusetts' approach to supporting children and family services?
So a lot of it is just, I think, the commitment to resources, especially over the last administration. They see the role of the department in a very different way than some of our neighboring states in terms of what our involvement is with families. I think we tend to be involved in a lot more families than a lot of other states in terms of trying to get involved a little bit earlier on to provide the supports for families before things get worse.
What comes first, a friendly governor or better funding?
We tend to do better under the Republican administrations as opposed to the Democratic administrations. When it's more of a Democratic administration, there's a lot more programming that people want to do, and that comes out of the same pie. So generally speaking, our slice of the pie gets reduced a little bit in terms of other initiatives. Other departments tend to do a little bit better under the Democratic administrations, while we tend to do a little bit better under the Republican administrations.
Massachusetts has been a beneficiary of substantially additional funding at the federal level from COVID. How much of that do you anticipate is going to trickle down into your agency?
Just overall funding with COVID has been extremely challenging through different points of the pandemic. So initially, I think part of the struggle is, even though there's a lot of funding, there's still a lack of availability in terms of services because there's just not enough people to work. I do probably 80 to 90% of the hiring of social workers. Generally speaking, when I had an authorization to hire, I would end up with like 80 to maybe 120 resumes. And I'm at a point now where I get about 13.
You have a 30-year tenure in state government. What advice would you have for someone, if you had to go through it all again, who's considering that line of work?
I think for me, it's just the passion to make a difference. And I've always felt that it's an experience to be in a position where you can provide a lot of support and help for folks. Obviously, there's additional responsibility that goes with that sometimes can be challenging, but it's just a rewarding experience and knowing that you are going to make a powerful impact. But I think I felt like I've made a strong impact in many, many lives over the years, and it's kept me going.
Your enthusiasm is contagious. You mentioned a few moments ago that you are not receiving a lot of qualified resumes. Is this part of the Great Resignation? Is it that you're trying to attract millennials? Help us to understand why so many qualified resumes have dried up.
For us, DCF is not generally known as a kind of entry-level position unless you complete an internship. So we hire a lot of our interns. Well, during the pandemic, we weren't able to really hire a lot of it. We weren't able to have a lot of interns. People are teleworking, which is in many ways convenient, but also I think in doing the work, it's really important for you to be able to develop relationships with your coworkers for support, and not being physically present with each other has been a real challenge. So initially, people were not asked to come to the office, and most of those folks have not stayed.
Dennis, if you could wave a wand and change one thing about today's Master of Social Work programs, what would that be?
I don't know if I would change it, but I would certainly look to emphasize the importance for passion, the importance for people to understand that the work that we do has long-term impact, and that you do make a difference. And I think really that excitement around the field, I think, is one of the things that help people get through those first couple of years.
Dennis, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Denis Pilotte, Area Program Manager for Children and Family Services for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. At its core, many people in nonprofits focus on the mission, while many people working for for-profits are trying to maximize profit. Go figure. But is it possible to go between those worlds? Our next guest certainly has done that. We're on location with Chuck Holland, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Hello, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Chuck, in your career, you've gone from tech companies to social enterprise organizations. Do you think it's possible to make that transition in reverse?
Yes, I think it is, because I'm trying it. And if I think what you mean is that if I'm running a nonprofit, can I become a for-profit?
Correct.
So if you're running a nonprofit, you can definitely spin out a for-profit. You can license something that you've created. You can own a for-profit arm of your business. You just can't sell yourself. Can't sell the nonprofit.
But how about your skills? Is it possible to go from running a social enterprise organization seamlessly to being a for-profit organization?
There are a lot of skills and commonality. I just want to say that if you're taking your corporation through this transformation, you're going to have some earthquakes. You're going to lose some people. Some people are not going to get it. Some people are going to feel left out. So we've tried that both directions, and you see that happening. Entrepreneurs are, pretty flexible and quite often could do either.
Do you think the personalities are the same? Sort of nonprofits attract a certain type of person while for-profit companies attract a different type of person. Once again, is that short-sighted?
I do think it's short-sighted. I think the same types of people are in both situations, but I do think the success of the management team is going to require some different personalities. You're going to be a lot more successful for a nonprofit if you're a big networker, as opposed to having great sales skills if you are a for-profit company.
Why is it so short-sighted to say that nonprofit management is about sustainability, covering your costs, the mission? What am I missing with that statement?
Well, it is a lot of work to maintain your fundraising for nonprofits. If you have a business and you want to grow capital, you can sell stock, you can sell something to somebody that's going to return a value to them. If you want to grow your nonprofit, you have to sell the value that they're getting, even though it's not monetary, and you have to keep finding new people, especially if you're expanding to new areas.
Chuck, with so many for-profit organizations these days trying to embrace social impact type causes or even ESG type causes, how, if you work for a nonprofit organization, are you supposed to attract people to come over to you?
I think you have to show them the value of your company, but you also have to show them the value of your culture. And people are a little more sensitive to the culture of the workplace, and it's getting tougher for-profits to keep their culture strong.
These days, you have moved to educating future business leaders. Talk to us about the approach, the pedagogy. If those leaders are working for for-profit organizations or not-for-profit organizations, do you educate them the same?
Well, that's really interesting. A long time ago, I probably would have said, sure, it must be a lot different. But these days, we have accelerators, social enterprise organizations that are startups, and you see young people coming out, usually right out of college, trying to do something world-changing. So I get pretty excited about it. We have a good example in Rhode Island. Social Enterprise Greenhouse is literally a social enterprise accelerator. If you go on their website, you'll just see lots of organizations that are trying to produce something new in the nonprofit space.
Chuck, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Chuck Holland, an executive who has seamlessly gone between for-profit and not-for-profit organizations throughout the course of his career.
Support for the Language of Business is from Boston University Questrom School of Business. We're also available as a podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for watching.